Joining us right now is Paige Cunningham. She's Executive Director, the Center for Bioethics and Human Dignity. Perfect person to have as we continue this conversation. We started it earlier this morning. It was very lively. Lots of you called in to chime in on it. We're talking about designer babies. Right in Gaithersburg at the FDA, they had 2 days of hearings on this thing. Apparently, it is theoretically possible, and they're doing it with animals right now in testing, to take the genetic material of 3 people to make a baby that will then no longer carry the gene that has certain defects, say for certain types of cancer and things like that. Paige Cunningham, this doesn't really sound like a great idea, despite the enticing notion of getting rid of certain diseases.
Well, good morning, Brian and Larry. It's great to join you. As you pointed out, this is a pretty serious topic. So I'm glad that the FDA took the 2 days of hearings to really hear about the science, and that they were somewhat skeptical about the science. There are several techniques that are actually involved here.
Right.
But one of the things they have in common is, as Dr. David Prentice pointed out, they're forms of human cloning. It's just happening at a very early stage, but the biological, the lab techniques are very similar, and nobody is really pointing that out, and I don't think the panel liked that either. But without going into too much detail, it's a process of trying to eliminate genetic disease that's carried in the mitochondria, which is DNA outside the nucleus. You know, we usually only talk about the nucleus. This is the mitochondria, which are sort of the energy powerhouses of the cell. And we focus on that, but what people aren't realizing is that it's not just the mitochondria that is being switched out. It's everything except the nucleus, so everything else in what's called the cytoplasm. And there are other structures in there. And the scientists aren't really sure how this will affect the development of the embryo. So if we just talk about science, there are huge safety concerns.
All right. So let's assume for just a moment that the science could be worked out. Ethically, is it a good idea?
Well, as you know, the panel did not address that. They only called scientists. They were intentionally excluding ethical and social considerations, but I'm glad that the witnesses did address that, and that's where some of the deeper concerns are. I mean, in addition to some pretty serious scientific concerns, first of all, there's a pretty strong national and international consensus in opposition to this kind of tinkering with human genes. And in part, that's because this is permanent. When you make a change at this level, you are affecting every single generation that's going to be born after this. So we are really experimenting upon our children and future generations. We have no idea how safe it is. It may take 1 or 2 generations to find out if this technique is safe. And who's paying the price? It's all the children that are either experimented upon or who actually are successfully born but may have some, we don't know, some pretty serious consequences, or they may turn out fine. But we're proposing this great scale experiment upon future children. There's just a pretty widespread opposition to genetic tinkering.
Yeah.
It is a kind of eugenics. Now, maybe we can't design babies with blonde hair and blue eyes, but this is still trying to design our children.
Paige Cunningham's our guest. She's from the Center of Bioethics and Human Dignity. And this debate was on CNN last night. Dr. Alan Copperman of Mount Sinai Hospital, this was his take on it, and I'd love for you to respond.
Okay.
We use antibiotics to stop disease. We use surgery to help take out cancers. And now we're taking embryos and trying to make them as healthy as possible and select the healthy embryos to make sure we have healthy children. So I don't think that this is extreme.
So, I mean, he's saying this is just another procedure to make sure that babies are healthy. What's wrong with that?
Oh, well, it's so appealing because we do want healthy babies. But he just kind of very cleverly compressed what we do after people are born and where they have the right to exercise informed consent and refuse the treatment, with actually tinkering with them before they are, even an embryo. I mean, the technique can happen before the egg and the sperm, the nucleus of the egg and sperm unite. So he's really mixing two things here, and he's appealing to our sentiment and our emotion without paying any attention to the cost. And I think one serious question is, where's the shutoff valve here? Yeah. Where do we draw the line? We start with very serious diseases, and these are heartbreaking diseases. But once this technique is approved, what reason is there to prevent that tinkering for something that is less serious?
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing to say, okay, we're going to eradicate a gene maybe that would eliminate cancer in this family. We've had a history of this particular kind of cancer. But then when you turn and say, well, I want a child with blue eyes, or I don't want my child to have male pattern baldness.
Exactly. Yeah, so if we're eliminating negative things, we don't seem to have the ability to restrain ourselves in our pursuit of perfection and, healthy children and pain-free lives. And that's a whole separate conversation about this continual drive to improve health and this drive for perfection. But I think there's another point that one of the public commenters made that I think is being ignored, and they said, I wish they were talking about research that would help me. Why aren't we focusing on research on how to treat people with these diseases now instead of tinkering around with experimental studies that have really unknown consequences, that are dealing with some of the most delicate balances in the human body, and that's the interaction of the hormones during pregnancy.
Right.
Why aren't we talking about those diseases? Why is it always looking for a perfect cure and ignoring the people who are here with us now?
Paige Cunningham, I remember when President George W. Bush had to wrestle with the idea of stem cell research, and his council on bioethics had a lot of attention at that time. I know that President Obama has a standing council on bioethics. Where are they on this? Seems to me they should be chiming in, yes?
Well, that council was disbanded under the current president. Now there's the Commission on Bioethics. I don't think they've addressed this concern. I could be wrong on that. But the previous council expressed grave concern, particularly about the permanent modification of the human genome. You may recall that C.S. Lewis it was back in the 1940s, warned us about the power that one generation has over future generations, right, and how frankly evil that is, because it may seem to be exercised for very good purposes, but ultimately it is a one-way power, and future generations have no ability to respond or undo it or to object. Yeah,
just because we can do it doesn't mean we should do it. Paige Cunningham, Executive Director of the Center for Bioethics and Human Dignity, really great stuff. Thanks for joining this conversation.
Thanks, Brian and Larry. Have a great day.